Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to another episode at the Warehouse Underground podcast, Real Talk, for warehouse, DC, and FC professionals of all levels around the globe. I'm Ben, the host of the show, and joining me on the show today is Spencer Hirsh. He's Senior Business Development Manager at TinMan Systems. Now, in the world of fulfillment centers and distribution centers, there is a lot of equipment, specifically conveyors and sorters. If you work in a big time FC or DC, you know that. It is absolutely paramount to what you're trying to do. But if you're like me and you're an ops leader in those facilities, you want them to work, but you don't necessarily know all of the ins and outs of the maintenance, preventative maintenance, how all the technology works and all that. And that is exactly where TinMan System comes in. So they're in conveyor health diagnostics world using technology and new systems to have better predictive maintenance of these types of machines. So I'm going to read this straight from their website. This is very interesting. TinMan Systems gives industrial equipment real-time inside the equipment visibility into things like vibration, thermal behavior, acoustics alignment, and wear to get to the mechanical truth that determines reliability. So that was a lot there. So I'm excited to talk with Spencer today because this is one of those episodes where I'm really going to learn myself a lot of cool things about this part of the industry. So with that, I will bring him on the stage right now. Spencer, my friend, thank you very much for joining the Warehouse Underground podcast. How are you today, sir?
Thank you. Very excited to be here. I'm doing well. How about yourself, Ben?
Yeah, I'm doing fantastic, man. So, like we talked about before the show, there is no talk in the podcast about the Seattle Seahawks, right? So I know you're a Seahawks fan and you're out there on the West Coast. I am an Atlanta Falcons fan, unfortunately. And so it's very difficult for me to talk about pro football. I'm sure you can appreciate that.
The time will come, I'm sure. We'll see. Takes time.
Yeah, cool. So this is going to be a great episode for people because most people have used these types of systems where you are in, and we'll get into this into the show. But before we do all that, though, you need to tell the audience a little bit about your background, how you came to be at TinMan Systems today, and kind of what is it all about.
Yeah, no, thanks for the question, and really happy to be here. And I think. Just like anyone's real career story, I mean, mine's still being written, I guess, but it surely has not been predictable. But it's been very exciting and cool to look back on, even in my short and early career of about 12 years. So TinMan Systems was actually the first professional internship I got when I was in University of Oregon, going after my undergrad in business and operations and business analytics. And so I got a little flavor for it, but it was a different company then, really focused on software and real-time data collection and analysis and control of embedded systems. And so that could be like drones, for example. And so it was kind of a taste towards that, but it also fed into my interest into being a part of exciting and new technology. I've always been excited to learn about the newest technology, whether it's something as standard as consumer electronics, an iPhone, or the latest features, or anything to do with video games. Really just being interested and curious because technology has always moved at a pace that seems to be faster than any other industry. And I like that fast pace. It can be stressful at times. It can force you to make hard decisions quickly with little information. But it also can be very exciting when it works out. And so after that point, I stayed in technology. I knew that's generally where I wanted to be. I graduated. I then got a job at a company called Bright Edge, which is a software company dealing in SEO optimization for big global brands. And that was exciting, but it wasn't necessarily something I saw as a long-term career path or interest for me. But being a part of a SaaS company was interesting too. So now at this point, it was mostly SaaS company experience. But I always wanted to work at Amazon. Amazon being in my quote unquote backyard growing up in Sammamish, Washington, just outside Seattle, most of my life. I had always been super interested in Amazon. I thought they were a great company. It was very exciting. They're always doing stuff with the customer in front of mine. It was very evident always that, they just, so I admired them in a lot of ways. And I also liked the idea of them reaching out into different technologies. And, but ultimately it's very competitive to get a job at Amazon. Yep. And so after I got enough experience, I kept applying, and went into a job as a vendor manager there, which was great because I got to touch on nearly every business function on Amazon, from operations, marketing, retail sales, across, the biggest retail piece of the business, which is focused in the US, right? North America.
Yeah.
So it was a really great experience, very fast paced, and moved into a few different roles during my time there. Great leaders, great colleagues. But again, just felt like it wasn't my end destination. And so wanted to get out of Amazon, have impact at a smaller company, because I felt like Amazon was a great, almost boot camp, if you will, for, me being younger in my career, getting a sense of how big companies work, the good, the bad, the ugly, right? But ultimately, TinMan Systems became somewhere that I was familiar with. It's a small company. It also sits exactly where high tech and supply chain meet, in my opinion, which I have discovered are my two biggest professional passions. So it became somewhat of something I didn't necessarily plan or predict for, but that started to line up in my interests. And I haven't looked back since. It's been almost 5 years of the company, and couldn't be more excited to be with them now.
Yeah. Yeah. Very cool, man. Now I follow you on LinkedIn, like I do almost all the guests that appear on the podcast. And one of the things that I've seen you post about as it relates to TinMan Systems is sort of a parallel between a piece of technology that most ops leaders are probably familiar with, and that's Cubiscan. And the sort of the history and development of Cubiscan, with the thought being that it's not necessarily that you have to have it, right? You could measure things with a tape measure, you could put them on a scale, but the logical progression of technology in the facility is to use machines to do this, right? To use the software to do this. And so do you feel like that there is that same sort of progression that happens with the area that you're in now with mechanical diagnostics? Do you see a parallel? I mean, talk to me about that parallel and how you see that between what you do and a traditional lease that an ops leader uses like Cubiscan.
Yeah, I think from my perspective too, is Cubiscan is, a tool that I admire, because whenever, and amongst other tools that become a standardized piece of day-to-day operations or routines at companies, it's relied upon. It's not a nice to have, it becomes a must have, but it started as a quote unquote nice to have. So I think in general, yes, to your point, it's not something necessarily you need until you think you need it, to do your business more effectively, to manage at scale. And I think the story of Cubiscan was inspiring to where we'd like to get with diagnostic tools, is because ultimately, just like other areas of our life and other industries, there will be a day where things can be done better and more efficiently and safely. And I think Cubiscan addresses that, going from, manual and periodic to automated, right? And it's objective data. It's not, did you really measure it the right way? Did you write down exact, and so having a standardized process, and the tool becomes just a piece of that standardization. So really with the mechanical diagnostics piece, what we see is ultimately a better way of capturing the health of automated systems. And the piece that is interesting from my perspective is the variety of equipment and automated equipment that's out there, right? From OEMs to end-of-life systems, there's Logan sorters still out in the fields for some companies, and Logan is no longer a company that's around. And so, and you have other companies, from Dramatic, Intelligrated, Boimer, Vanderlande, Daifuku. And so there's so much different equipment. And some of these OEMs, which are partners too, report some of their own health of their own equipment. But in terms of empowering the warehouse worker with a third-party agnostic tool that can take universal diagnostics, that was a major gap that we saw in the industry. And so I think, just educating that we can do better than having Joe with 20 years of experience that's worked at one facility his entire life being relied upon every day and being asked so many questions about like, hey, I heard this sound, what do you think? And becoming more, so we can free up Joe to be more of a leader rather than someone that's answering questions all day.
Yeah,
and so I think,
absolutely.
Yeah.
So let me, sorry to interrupt you there.
No, don't worry about it. Yeah, no
but
worries.
One of the things that I often see inside facilities, and I was kind of guilty of this too when I was working in there, is like you said, when it comes to ops, you have a little bit of a gut feel, right? Mm-hmm. And you want to push and push and push and push as hard as you can go. And so sometimes there's this philosophy when it comes to equipment that I'm just going to push that thing as far as it can go all the way until failure. And then it sort of breaks and then it's just huge catastrophe. So, but if people have the visibility, if they have the technology, if they have the awareness to say, no, you're running it to the red line, here's how you should be treating it.
Right.
It seems like you can head off a lot of that at the pass and then really save a lot of money. True. So, I mean, what do you think about that philosophy of run till failure? And then how much cheaper is it? How much of an impact is it if people are able to sort of not do that, avoid that, save that preemptively?
Yeah, it's the main problem with maintenance of really any asset beyond conveyors, sorters. I mean, it's firefighting everywhere, from anything from like HVAC to refrigeration to conveyors, sorters, robotic arms. Everything has a failure point, and having more visibility into what that failure point is helpful. And I think too it's hard to, because obviously we all know, when it comes to these industries, the elephant in the room, which is the disconnect between leadership and folks on the floor. And I see this across multiple industries we support. We support food and beverage, we support retail e-commerce, we support postal logistics, airports, and the common theme is still this gap. Some gaps are closed more than others, but there is gaps. And so the one thing that can't be argued, and a disconnect can be brought closer together, is data, objective data. And so the more data we're feeding into that, the better. And so it does not surprise me that there is a culture of running until failure, because if it's not, there's the famous saying that can be applied in so many ways: if it's not broke, don't fix it. But if we can get ahead of that, there's also the downstream impact too. So if you think from the perspective of the spare parts managers at these warehouses, or regional or national, or however they cover it, it's helpful to have projections so you can then forecast and put it into your budget. And so if we think of it beyond just, hey, we need, we want to run until failure because we don't need to replace it, it's not broken. Okay, well, it may not be just that simple, right? It's like, okay, well, it's going to cost more because, one, you have to pay a service, either your in-house services team or outside services team, potentially overtime to respond. And so you're paying more for that. And then you're urgently requiring spare parts that could have been forecasted because you see it getting towards the end of the lifespan. So then you're paying for the expedited delivery, and any other of those additional charges. And so it's easier to justify when something breaks because you need to get it replaced or fixed. And so it's easier to get those expenses because things need it. But we can do better than responding to it like firefighters, right? And so really, it's trying to get ahead of it and also being able to communicate the downstream benefits to that, the rush to repair, pulling people off projects that they could be more proactive on.
Yeah. Plus you disrupt the service to the customer too.
Yeah. I mean, and right. That, yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's a big one.
Packages aren't going out. You got backup plans on the floor and all these things are happening. And it's funny that you kind of the way you described it, it makes me think back and I go, I can't remember ever once looking at any dashboard or metric or anything that showed me the health of the conveyor system in the facility. I mean, this is like $1 million piece of equipment, but yet
right, exactly.
When I'm driving my own car, I have that, right? I have like just my dash panel. I know the temperature, I know the fuel, I know the battery, I know all that. But yet somehow I just didn't put two and two together. Right. So it's like, why would you drive your car and monitor all this stuff and know when to take it into the shop and not treat your equipment in a fulfillment center the same way, or at least not have some visibility on it,
Yeah. Yeah. And I think too, to the point about the customer piece being damaged, there is then that downstream impact to harming the customer. And this can be at airports too. Think about issues on baggage handling systems when and even more so, I think the stakes, I mean, you look at large retailers, e-commerce, post and parcel, these are smaller packages and most, at least I believe in my experience, I've seen are less than 5 pounds. And you're doing a huge volume, more or less. And depending on the industry. And so maybe you have a few of these packages not getting to the destination on time, but they eventually get there. And maybe some of these items aren't so urgent, right? Like paper towels or something. Maybe it is urgent. Maybe you ran out of paper towels, but you kind of get my point is you can go to the grocery store if it doesn't get there on time and you need it for like a family gathering. With things like bags that are checked at airports, missed enplanements are an absolute disaster. Because it's not only customer trust, and I think in my mind, if an airline screws up transferring my luggage or doesn't get it on the plan time, it only takes one time for me to maybe never want to book that airline again.
Yeah,
depending on the consequence. And so, whereas if a retailer or e-commerce provider is shipping paper towels a couple of days late, I'd probably still order from them. And so I think the tolerance for things going wrong in these different industries could be much worse. And so there's the missed enplanements part, the customer trust, the downstream impact of them not wanting to buy a ticket on your airline for the next 20 years that they're a frequent traveler, right? So trying to understand the downstream impact more so than what's being reported, because missed enplanements falls into maybe another bucket, not tied to something breaking down or a diverge not going correctly.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, let me ask this question to you and we've talked a little bit about this earlier in the show, but data, I mean, it sounds like data for an ops leader on the ops floor in terms of, labor and where they are in their package delivery.
Yeah.
Modern day fulfillment centers are running off data. I mean, they're managing to that. It's everywhere. They can't run if they don't have that, or they can't run well. But I mean, what do you think about how do you balance the sort of gut feel that we talked about with, hey, I've been doing this a long time, I'm very familiar with the equipment, or I'm very familiar with the floor. How do you balance that gut feel with, it sounds like, where TinMan Systems is, and that is trying to move the ball forward, like using data and technology and systems to kind of provide that and balance that? Because I would feel like, at least with a lot of techs out there, they probably rely on their gut feel a lot because they kind of came up the ranks and that's what they had. See, how do you square that and balance those two?
Yeah, it's a great question, and one that I continue to try to convey is, I think generally when folks think of predictive or preventative maintenance, they're thinking that it's going to do everything they used to do and more. And so I think there's too much of a heavy reliance on some of the technologies that are out there. And
Yeah.
I try to set expectations with some of our tools early on is we want you to use this tool frequently enough and marry that with your own understanding of the system to then tell the system, and setting certain thresholds, because ultimately we can't just, there's no silver bullet, right? That's kind of what I'm trying to say is I think we rely and we think it's the end all be all. Maybe we get there at some point, but we have to get there in the right way. And so with, our tools or just generally with tools that are used throughout the industry in this profession is we need to be skeptical early on to the data and question the data and make sure the data is reliable. And at whatever point it may be, when we're going to say this data is reliable for the XYZ reasons, it's going to be because there was skeptics involved early to make sure that the data is reporting what matters to them in the right way, right? Like, do we only care about assets running over 100 degrees or 120 degrees? Does vibration threshold make sense at 2Gs versus 4Gs? So being skeptical early on to then say the standardization that's unique for your equipment, your facility, is absolutely critical. We can't just assume the equipment is just going to know exactly all the context. And it's just like similar to AI now in every industry is, folks that have issues with it or maybe are going too aggressively into it. And then they spend too much money and they realize maybe certain expenditures were a mistake. It's because it was relied upon too much, too fast. We need human judgment, right?
Yeah, I think it's always going to be a blend at some point. It's just getting that mixture right, the 70-30 or whatever. And I don't think it's just too many variables, I think, to completely remove people and their brain and their gut feel and their experience out of the equation altogether, at least in my experience. But you have to figure out where that healthy balance is, I think on that side.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and another thing, I always tell these engineers, maintenance techs, maintenance leaders is we know you know how to do your job. We're not telling you how to do your job, a different job. What we're saying is look through this new lens of tools that can help you do your job more efficiently. And I think there generally is a fear too in these different industries of anything that seems in any way automated, regardless of whether it's predictive maintenance or baggage loading or dock loading, folks can get defensive and understandably so that it might take their job. But I think being clear from the get-go is like, hey, if it is, not necessarily our technology to take their job, it's just do it more efficiently and quickly, right? And there may be some other technologies automated that replace workers, right? But I think we need to be very clear from the get-go what is being replaced versus what is being augmented.
Yeah. But with that though, and I've always said this as a counter argument to that, the automation piece, it just, it normalizes over time. Like in a way, a forklift itself is a piece of automation that made workers less needed, right? Because, but now no one thinks of it that way. But originally it made things go faster. It made it more efficient inside the warehouse. So now people just like, oh, it's just a forklift, whatever. So I think, given enough time, I think people just sort of adapt to this new world, this new reality of this is the way it should be. So let me ask this question. Let's talk about real world examples. I know you've been doing this a while. How do things typically unfold in the facilities that you're in? Like, how do things go bad for them? How much headache could they avoid? And what could the quantifiable numbers be, right? Whether that's in revenue or saving, like what are the numbers, the kind of the impact of what happens if you do this right versus if you do it wrong inside your facility with no visibility and no sort of strategy on any of your equipment like this, at least not adequate strategy, I should say.
Yeah, so I'll dive into it in a couple of different ways, but I guess I'll start with a main data point that we see that we share with first-time, prospective customers or partners. Is I'll share like a general data point, and then I'll share a couple of examples. So generally speaking, when it comes to conveyors and sorters, some of the most common issues, and maybe someone might correct or add to this list, but in terms of what we've been made aware of over time, is issues like misaligned belts, failed roller bearings, overheating assets, on average can cause about $20,000 to $100,000 in costs and lost production costs, right?
Yeah.
And so per hour. And so, and that may change depending on the volume, right? If it's, volume could be anything, right? It could be getting parts at a parts distribution center to make cars, right? Different parts to make cars. It could also be bags at an airport, or it could be, letters in the mail. So depending on the average value of these items and the number of these items on an average per hour basis, units per hour, that amount can change. That's why the gap's fairly large on average, 20 to 100,000. But the point being is, if we communicate it that way, like, hey, and keeping track of the costs too, that's really key. And so generally speaking, those types of failures can cost about that much. And in terms of different examples, one example is because we have partners on the integrator and OEM side. And a lot of their priorities have to do with installation commissioning work at new facilities or brownfield facilities, putting in new equipment. And so they have a big responsibility to make sure everything's working at go live. And that takes time, right? And a lot of them, up until the point that they may adopt some tools and technology, maybe ours, is they have a clipboard and a very long checklist. And the responsibility falls on whomever is responsible for signing off on that checklist. And a lot of it is not backed by data, right? It's the clipboard and someone walking, hey, how do all the belts look? Are all the motors running reliably? How long have we continuously ran this without failure before handing off to the customer? And then everyone, I'm saying this loosely, signs off, right? Maybe literally too. And, but that's a lot of trust you're putting in one person's assessment, or maybe a handful of people's assessment. And it also takes a lot more time. So I'll share an example on this side, and then I'll share an end customer example. So one publicly and one I'll keep anonymous. So with the integrator OEM side, they were doing work at a very large DC for a very large customer to install and commission new conveyor equipment. And their typical routine before using one of our tools, the MCIS, was to walk through with a checkboard. And they had some tools. They had a thermal gun. They also had a sound measurement device. But they were different tools capturing one data point. And then you're also still doing the manual inspection with your two eyes, right? Doing the checks on the belts and everything else for anything else that seems off. And so through the collection of different data points, someone's visual assessment, this typical installation would have taken them anywhere between 6 to 8 hours to verify and validate everything is running smoothly. And that's without one consistent stream of data. So you're getting less quality data in a longer period of time. And they said once they implemented the MCIS in terms of their installation and commissioning process, they could still use some of the elements of their checklist, right? All these things make sense to check, but doing it through the lens of one single tool and device being that package or the quote unquote payload. And it took them then 15 minutes because they had to use the system once and just run it through. And you get all the data, and you can take that data and analyze it and go through it, outside of the facility. You don't have to be on the facility. So you're saving time, obviously a ton of time. And, but you're also looking at that data skeptically through the human perspective. So that's important too, as a big piece. And then you can share that across all stakeholders, right? So you have the customer, you have your organization, maybe a controls company, electrical company, and everyone can look at the same data, not just one person's clipboard. So that was a huge savings for them. And another example, one that I can publicly share, because actually DHL, one of our customers, actually wrote about it in an article. And so in one example, so the DHL Express Germany and DHL Customer Solutions and Innovation team worked together. They purchased and used one of our MCIS. And at their gateway, they used the system to capture critical vibration on a brand new crossbelt sorter, which was caught before go live. So even from an end customer perspective, here's an example of the customer feeling empowered to use a tool that they own on the equipment they just spent, likely, I'd imagine, millions of dollars on. And it was fixed before production, and the insights were shared with that OEM, right? Hey, we found a problem, and look at it through the lens of this tool, because it's third party, it's reliable, it's not just Joe waving a finger in there, so to speak. There was also, on this same example, there's a 2 millimeter height offset between the shorter and the chutes. Invisible to the eye, but ultimately, that's where data can matter, right? 2 millimeters. It's not, hey, if someone goes out and does their own measurement or assessment, it's like, that doesn't look like 2 millimeters, right?
Oh.
So that can end up with downstream damages to the packages, things not getting to customers on time, right? It's fairly obvious to think about downstream impact, but quantifying these tiny problems that can then cascade into big problems, that's the part that this helps them with. And so I think, what we're seeing is this empowerment for the maintenance technician or engineer, regardless of where they are, whether they're working for an OEM, integrator, or end customer. There is an added component of empowerment and also excitement to do their job, right? If you're not, I think generally speaking, if you're in a job where you're constantly firefighting, maybe that's exciting to you. But overall, I think that could weigh on your stress and anxieties and take a toll, potentially in your personal life too, because you're just always so drained and stressed. And so,
because the people that are removed from that firefighting expect you to complete their initiatives, their strategy, their things. You don't really get reward points for firefighting. You still have to do your extra stuff. So just
exactly, it doesn't show up. Yeah, it doesn't show up in the congratulatory notes or the earnings reports or anything like that. Because a lot of these companies are very large. They have a lot of goals and they have a lot of people to answer to. And ultimately, however it gets done, whether that worker is very stressed and looking to change jobs or excited about work, it still has to get done. And they don't, some may not necessarily care as much.
Yeah. And I agree with you on that. And I think that this is so important and so needed, especially in 2026, but really and beyond. I mean, this is the future of distribution. Even if you have small warehouses, everyone's looking to upgrade into tech, automation, conveyance, sortation. So it's the wave of the future. So now you guys have a lot of amazing products, and how you present it, right, with the dashboards and everything. And so can you talk to me about sorter vision, because sorter vision is the flag vision. Explain to everybody what sorter vision is and how it works. And then also, what is it like if someone integrates with you? Like what can they experience? Do they need to prepare? What's the implementation phase? Like, how does all that roll out?
Yeah, it's a great question. And sorter vision is really exciting because, really, what you're looking at here on the screen is our mobile conveyor inspection system. And what we did is we took the mobile conveyor inspection system really with customer feedback, with them saying, hey, this is great that it rides my conveyor, but for sorters, it would be great to have a perspective from the carrier, right? And also visuals underneath the plane of the carrier. And so we took this same approach, but didn't stray away from the customer simplicity piece. So in terms of the user experience, the MCIS, the sorter vision, and other tools are designed intentionally simple to use, because ultimately you can't introduce a tool in these environments that makes things complicated because folks won't use it. And so with that principle in place, we still took the same premise from user experience of, the onboard SD card. You don't need to pre-install any software. The only applications you need to access the data and the analysis of the dashboard is an internet browser, Excel, and Notepad. I think everyone can say they all have those running on their computer.
Yes, I hope so.
Or yeah, and I would hope so, right? So with that being said, there's no necessarily preparation. These tools can be handed off. So with sorter vision specifically, so you can imagine it's a crossbelt sorter moving towards us. And this is one example of a spinoff really of the MCIS that we were talking about just earlier, and something that came as a result of customer feedback and taking the best of the MCIS and making some tweaks and changes. And so what we've done to date in terms of doing this for customers is, they would simply, ship their carrier to our production facility. We do all the measurements and specs in-house. And obviously, regardless of whether it's a crossbelt or tilt tray and the different OEMs, that's why it's key to have one of the carriers in-house. And what we ask is, hey, with a number of questions, we get it to form factor fit to become the quote unquote carrier. So in this graphic example, you can imagine there would be a top plane, right, that you see with the belts, but with it removed, and then the system attached, but it doesn't connect to anything on the sorter. It's just experiencing the ride of the sorter while also having HD video cameras looking underneath at different assets underneath as it rides. So think of it as a diagnostic carrier, and it's agnostic. So whether you are working with, a Boimer sorter or a integrated sorter, this can be a third-party reporting mechanism to the diagnostics of the health. So really, this is more of a system that has been shaped and geared towards our end customers across different industries, and still collecting the critical diagnostic data that is important for conveyors too, in terms of the thermal vibration, and especially the sorter vibration is significantly lower, and that's a good thing, right? If there's versus a conveyor and going through transitions or diverts, you're going to see much more. So it's very interesting to see the parallels, but also the differences between what's most important. Or the sorters, I think, because it's mostly flatline, hopefully the vibration becomes a little less important, but it still reports it along with all the other diagnostic data that is important to capture, especially pitch and roll. You wouldn't want that being off on a sorter that could then result in an issue down the road.
Yeah, absolutely.
And even we found like tools and spare parts in the sorter, like belly, the underbelly of the crossbelt. And it can be something, unfortunately, that is, maybe someone just had a long day and they forgot something, but that forgetting that tool and placing it, in a spot like that, so critical that could then damage wiring or brush brackets. And then it's like, okay, what would the quote unquote autopsy reveal, right? Oh, it was a screwdriver that cost us, X dollars. That's a lot. And so I think, this graphic here, is an example of what can happen when a foreign object enters very high-speed conveyor and sorter environments. Is it can then result in a lot of crazy things happen, potentially something as extreme as a fire that damages electrical wiring and can then cause, a lot of downstream impact that then results in this $8 million number. But ultimately, it's really just about accountability too, having the data in the right place at the right, at the right times that can be relied upon and looked at later as a very important reference.
Awesome. Very unique, right? Like very unique, very needed and insightful. And that this is, I agree with your Cubiscan analogy. Like, I think this is the logical progression that people should be taking as it pertains to automation, the PM, their systems, the visibility on that, the tracking of that. And there's so much rides on that. And people just you to just pretend like that's, it's fine. It's whatever. And certainly as an ops leader, I mean, most facilities have, maintenance there on site, but I think as an ops leader, I think they need to bring some of this stuff into their cross check too, because this is your equipment. I mean, this is your operation. You're there to manage just more than the people. Like, you've got to manage the entire operation in the facility. And this is a huge part of it. This is a huge asset. So,
and I would add to that too, with the ops and maintenance, I see it's often siloed. And oftentimes in ops, they see maintenance or any tools or sensors, whether it needs to be installed or, some of the tools being used in the facility, as disruptions to the throughput goals that they have, right? And so it becomes almost like this nuisance, but when something breaks down, it's the biggest headache on earth, right? And they have to deal with it. And then they're getting on maintenance. Hey, did you inspect your things? It's like, well, you wouldn't let us adopt this tool and bring it into your environment. So I think it's also a lot to do with leadership oversight and making sure they hold these teams accountable. It's like operations, you're going to work with maintenance because this makes sense, because anything that affects maintenance affects you and vice versa. So you can't be a blocker to introducing tools that will keep your equipment running to achieve your goals. So leaders are a big, big piece of this, because otherwise the politics will play out with the local warehouse leaders and colleagues, like they typically do, without someone intervening saying it needs to be done this way.
Yeah. Cool, man. Well, where can people find out more about you? I know you've got website. I've been to your website. It's very cool, by the way. People should.
I agree. Yeah. It's a very
I know you're on LinkedIn, but what are you going to shows, trade shows? Like, how can people contact you or find out more about TinMan Systems?
Yeah, sure. Well, I'm available and very active on LinkedIn, so folks can just go to my profile and connect with me there or message. I also just really enjoy just learning about different industries and different folks and professions. So whether it's just networking, a coffee chat, or learning more about our solutions, I'm always interested in a conversation. Aside from that, of course, our website, tinmansystems.com. We also have a YouTube channel. You can just find us TinMan Systems, but and also follow our company page on LinkedIn as well. So been a lot of activity and exciting announcements recently, including a partnership announcement with Carolina Handling. So anyways, very, very, very exciting. And thank you. And I really appreciate the time. This has been great. And if anyone can extract a little value and learn a little bit from the conversations, then I think our goal is achieved.
Yeah. Awesome, man. Well, thank you very much for appearing on the podcast. It's very open, insightful. I think you're doing something that's really cool. I learned a lot on the show today, and, good luck to you guys in the future. And I was happy to be a part of it. Happy to be a part of the growth, man. I like what you're doing at TinMan System. Very cool. Very neat.
Appreciate it, Ben. And thanks for having me on the show. It's great.
You got it, my friend. Take care. Go Seahawks. Yeah.
Thanks. Go Seahawks. You bet.
See you around. All right. Thanks again, Spencer Hirsh from TinMan Systems, coming to talk about some very cool and unique stuff on the show about how to handle your sortation systems, your conveyance systems with new technology, right? Better visibility, better tech. Like, get on board with that, because that is the future of that, I think. So, Spencer, I appreciate it. Thanks again. As the Warehouse Underground goes, please sign up for the community if you have not done so. We have over 300 people that have signed up for the community. It's free at thewarehouseunderground.com. We have message boards in there, live shows. We just had a live show with a recruiter in there, networking, resources, all sorts of things that you will like if you're in this industry. So sign up to be a member at thewarehouseunderground.com. And also, please check out the other show that I do. It's called the Tiger Team Show. I do it with my co-host, Jordan's. Like the show, but not. It's all about life in warehouses, DCs, and FCs from the employee perspective, but with a lot of wit and humor and sarcasm draped all over it. So if you work out there in the facilities and you want some lighthearted humor from people that understand that very well, check that show out. I think you guys will really enjoy it. It's really funny, and you'll get right away exactly what we were talking about. As this podcast goes, I will see you guys next week for another episode. Thanks for listening. Bye.